On the other hand, plane geometry is more economical because you just use 2 dimensions. While spherical geometry, you need the 3 dimensions, to put your sphere in something, in our space, which is 3-dimensional. So it seems that it demands more information. So this is the kind of dilemma that you have. Either work on a simple geometry that requires many dimensions, in this case many 3, or work with a complicated geometry that requires few dimensions, and in this case few is 2. This is a problem that can get much more complicated than this, but this is the essence of this problem, which the geometers call embedding. Embedding is like the spherical representation because we think of the sphere as part of the 3-dimensional space, as embedded in the 3-dimensional space. And on the contrary, the plane representation, geometers would call it intrinsic, because it only uses the 2 dimensions which are intrinsic to the surface of the sphere. So, intrinsic or embedded? What is geometry? Should it be intrinsic or should it be embedded? It takes us back to the problem of what we want to do in geometry. At first, geometry developed, with the ancient Greeks as a Euclidean geometry, doing figures that you can draw in the sun or on paper or on a flat stone or whatever. Then people understood when you travel long distance and so on, you need to understand spherical geometry. And then some people say, after all, you could do geometry on any surface, not especially a sphere. It would be some weird thing. And then people said, let's work on any possible geometry and devise a theory that can encompass all of them. And let's try also to do things which withstand deformation, things which are as intrinsic as possible. If you take a sheet of paper and you make a drawing on your sheet of paper. This is my sheet of paper, I do some drawing on it. If I bend the sheet of paper, from an embedding point of view, it will be very different. But the figure here will remain the same. So if I look at it intrinsically, it should be the same object. And geometry made huge progress when it started to think in intrinsic terms, even for curved geometries. This is related to the development of the non-Euclidean geometries in the 19th century, and in particular the so-called hyperbolic geometry, which was devised by people like Gauss and Lobachevsky. Hyperbolic geometry, like the Euclidean geometry, was a geometry in which all points were equivalent, no privileged point. A sphere also is such a geometry, On a sphere, from any point, the sphere looks just the same. There are very few geometries which have this property of looking the same. And the hyperbolic geometry is one like this. But somehow it's the inverse of the sphere. While the sphere is always positively curved, the hyperbolic plane is always negatively curved. And it has some weird properties. Here is an example of a picture in the hyperbolic plane of these lines, which are all geodesic lines, meaning shortest path. And we are making it rotate like we would do to rotate a figure by rotation in the plane. See how unusual it looks. Here is a famous rendition of the hyperbolic geometry by M.C. Escher, the famous artist. And you see, hyperbolic geometry is a geometry in which units of length will change from place to place in a plane representation. I told you intrinsically every point is the same, but when we represent it on the plane, we are forced to make it having dimensions that change from place to place. So that in this, each fish has the same length as any other fish. This is hyperbolic geometry. And you may ask, okay, but now can I represent this hyperbolic geometry in such a way that the distances are not distorted, like I would do on the sphere? Can I embed this hyperbolic geometry? in our three-dimensional space. And this is a problem which already tormented Gauss in the early 19th century. And he thought, well, there's a problem in there. There's a problem. And it was a huge progress when Riemann, the student of Gauss, said, let's not worry whether it's embeddable or not. Let's go on and work with the intrinsic properties. And we'll make progress from this. And he defined the so-called curvature, which to this day has remained the most important tool used by geometers to study non-Euclidean geometries, the Riemann curvature. Without Riemann curvature, general relativity would never have existed, and an enormous amount of everything that we see in image processing could not exist either. And Riemann set up the axiom that we still use to this day to describe a non-Euclidean geometry, the concept of Riemannian manifold, which is a geometry in which each point is in a neighborhood resembling a distorted Euclidean space. This was a marvelous achievement, and one in which you say, let's forget whether it can be embedded. So we can treat much more general situations.